Hey everybody, thanks for checking out episode 2 of this series. You can check out episode 1 linked above. For this episode I wanted to discuss Guardian because it has a special role in groups. From hardcore speed clear guilds all the way down to the most casual pugs, most people understand that having a Guardian in your team is a very good thing. Everybody loves having a Guardian in their party, and many people assume that that really doesn't need any explanation of why. How many of us see Reddit or forum posts that say something like, all you do is stacked and you can win in dungeons. You don't have to dodge, you don't do anything but stack in DPS. To me, this frequent statement really shows how ignorant the person making it is. The answer to how and why stacking works in speed clears is the Guardian. For ignorant players that are making the stack and win statement, he doesn't realize that he's being carried, but he is. And he's being carried by the Guardian. When the group wipes due to a Guardian happening to fail at something, the person making that statement doesn't know why the group failed and will frequently lash out at the quote-unquote bad DPS as the culprit, when the actual reason was the DPS was fine, it was just the support that was bad. Good Guardians are out there unknowingly carrying legions of bad players through dungeons, and that really is a testament to the power of the Guardian and their role in the groups. Like I said, most would agree that a Guardian being in a party really needs no explanation, but that's not entirely accurate. The truth is that a Mesmer can do many of the things a Guardian can do, plus Mesmers bring Time Warp, which is a massive DPS increase over a Guardian. So bringing a Guardian instead of some other class really is a conscious choice. You bring Guardian over another class when particular instances, which actually happens to be most instances, require things that a Guardian is really good at. So let's get into it. What are Guardians actually good at, and what are they expected to do for their team in speedruns to make the carrying so easy? Alright, so for starters, the very first and most important role of the Guardian in the PvE meta is projectile defense. Wall of Reflect and Shield of Avenger are the two most important utility skills a Guardian has. The single most important play skill that a Guardian player can have is the knowledge of when to use their reflects. Knowing which mobs or bosses in the dungeon have projectiles and bringing utilities to defend against that is the first level. That's the most basic thing, and if you guys go to gw2dungeons.net, you can get a rundown and it will help you compile a mental list of every encounter that is going to require reflex. The second level is knowing how much defense you need. Will you be able to get away with just bringing wall for this fight, which will allow you to bring something else instead of Shield of Avenger? Will you need both wall and shield to survive this fight? Will you be in a situation where the shield will die immediately, so even though you would like more reflex, the shield won't live very long due to AoEs? That's something to consider as well. So knowing how many reflex you need for the fight is important. The third level is knowing what sort of projectile you're dealing with. Is the projectile reflectable? Is it absorbable? Is it both? Is it neither? These are important distinctions, and knowing the answer will allow you to play as intelligently as possible and raise your levels above the players who are out there just spamming skills and hoping for the best. So again, projectile defense is super important. If you're not sure whether you should be bringing wall or shield to a particular fight, that's definitely the #1 thing you can do as a Guardian player to get better. Because a Guardian who's able to successfully prevent all the reflex and projectiles for his team is going 90% of the distance there. So the second thing that Guardians bring that is highly important, and that's stability. Along with reflex, stability is the second pillar of the Guardian, and why people bring Guardians. No other class has as easy an access to a long-lasting stability as the Guardian. Stand Your Ground and Hollow Ground chained together will give your party tons of stability, as much as they should need for any encounter. Many bosses have disruptive CC attacks that will at worst wreck your DPS when they knock everyone back or immobilize them or petrify them or any other scenario where your people are disabled and not doing DPS. And that's at the best case. A lot of times those attacks will wipe you if you get CC'd. And that is pretty bad for group success. So people often... So those people who I referenced above that said... that use the stack and win quote, what they're ignoring is the little stability boon icon on their buff bar while they're doing their DPS. They don't realize that without that little stability icon, their DPS wouldn't really amount to much for that particular encounter. They don't realize that that little stability icon was what prevented their death from happening 3 times over during the course of a fight. So obviously, stability is super important, but just as obviously, you can't just spam your stability. It's pretty useless if you just use your stability skills on cooldown in a fight. A good Guardian is expected to know when to bring the stability and also when to use it. So it's a matter of knowing what fights you're going to need it and when in the fight you'll need it. If you use it too soon in the important fights, it won't be available when you need it. You do have very high uptime with these two skills, but you don't have 100% uptime. Not even close. So it is important to use them tactically. The second part is knowing when to use it. Like I said, if you use it too soon, it won't be available when you need it. If you use it too late, the party's already going to be downed or CC'd or petrified by the time you need it. And stand your ground is only a stun breaker for you. It's not a stun breaker for your whole party. So using it too late is not really going to help matters. The best Guardian players out there know how to time their stability so that it's always up right before the big CC attack hits and making sure that it's there when needed. And that is the difference between a good and a great Guardian in PvE. In fact, they're so good at it that your teammates often won't even notice it. They'll just, like I said, be going happily along their way, doing their DPS, and not getting knocked back, and they don't think twice about the fact that it was the Guardian who used Stand Your Ground at the right time who allowed that to happen. Sort of like the saying, a good referee is one that you don't notice. A good use of stability is one that you don't necessarily notice. The next thing that Guardians are expected to do, and that is granting Aegis. Guardians should master the use of Aegis. Most of the Aegis skills are on very long cooldowns, 60 seconds, 81.5 seconds, and then their elite on a 90-second cooldown can recharge this one. So you have 3 Aegises, and they're on very long cooldowns. Obviously, spamming your Aegis is the sign of a Guardian who is panic pressing his skills and doesn't really know what he's doing. However, a good Guardian who knows exactly when to use Aegis makes it seem to his party like he has 6 Aegises instead of 3 because so little damage is getting through. Much of this capability comes down to knowing the boss's attacks intimately. The definitive use of Aegis is for bosses with a couple attacks that are small damage attacks, and then one big wind-up massive attack. A good Guardian will let the smaller attacks through and then activate the Aegis right when the big attack is coming in. And if his team doesn't dodge, then the Aegis will be there to bail them out. And the Aegis won't get wasted on one of the little attacks. So a good Guardian with a fight that lasts a relatively short amount of time should be able to have enough Aegises to prevent most of the big attacks from hitting, so long as there's not a lot of incidental attacks that might strip the Aegis before the big attacks hit. Again, and I reference the ignorant player who thinks that all you do is stack and win. He most likely isn't noticing the fact that the Guardian is granting Aegis at key times and keeping him alive. And He's going on about his way thinking that his DPS is carrying the party when it's really the Guardian's 2 Aegises that prevented one-hit kill attacks from hitting him that's actually carrying the party. In normal dungeons that have relatively short fights with a good enough Guardian, most teams won't necessarily need to dodge against certain bosses until the Guardian announces on TeamSpeak or even in party chat no more Aegis. So while Aegis is really a defensive skill, the fact that it allows the high DPS classes to avoid having to dodge or to avoid having to bring defensive utilities means that the team's actual DPS that they effectively put out goes up because they can sort of offload the defense to the Guardian character, and it's sort of a trust issue. If you can trust your Guardian to be on his game and handle the Aegis rotations, you can really go much further. So the next thing that's expected of Guardians is that they will be the de facto manager of the party's conditions. Contrary to what a lot of people think, conditions aren't really a huge problem in PvE. Very few bosses in the game have significant condition stacking applications, and some of the trash mobs that do have decent condition damage output can really be mitigated with blinds. However, there will be times when a poison field is wrecking your party, or a really badly timed chill or cripple is causing problems on a trash run. And Guardians are really the one that people expect to deal with that. Guardians have the ability to bring very powerful condition cleanses in the form of Purging Flames, as well as Virtue of Resolve and the trait Absolute Resolution. So this is going to allow your Virtue of Resolve to remove 3 conditions when you activate it, as well as giving a heal and regeneration. So it's a nice little boost to your team that might be suffering from some critical conditions. Between these 2 skills, that is really all the condition removal you should ever go out of your way to bring for 99% of the encounters. However, one advanced skill that Guardians can bring in a pinch is that they can offer a little bit more for that. The best Guardians out there understand that Greatsword has a symbol of Wrath, and also your Wall of Reflect that are light fields. And they also know that they have a Whirl finisher on their Greatsword. Interestingly enough, if you whirl in a light field, it shoots Cleansing Bolts. Cleansing Bolts will cleanse the conditions of your party members when they get hit by them. If your team is tightly stacked, whirling in the light field is going to cleanse all their conditions. Granted, this isn't a sure thing. There's oftentimes going to be fire fields down that are going to interrupt your whirl, or not interrupt your whirl, but will stop you from using Cleansing Bolts. In fact, most of the time teams prefer to have the fire field down than the light field. But like I said, this is a situation where you've already used your Purging Flames and your Virtue of Resolve, and you still need more Condi Cleanse. You can whirl in a light field and get a bit more done. If you are aware of the ability to do that, it is a big benefit to your team. And like I said, there's only a few times when you're ever going to be called upon to do it. But just knowing that you have that trick in your arsenal, and the fact that you can break it out at a moment's notice when needed to do, without having to respec or retrade or re-gear, is going to be a very good thing for you as a Guardian player. So the other interesting thing I wanted to mention for Guardians is a good Guardian needs to know when to use his staff. And the right time to use a staff is when your team is getting ready to do a trash run. Symbol of Swiftness is great for making sure that your party has swiftness. It's somewhat the Guardian's job to make sure the symbol's down in keyed times to make sure your party all has swiftness when they're getting ready to do a difficult trash run. You'll notice when you run with good Guardians, the symbol of Swiftness appears in front of your group as you're running, in places where the trash mobs won't aggro anyone when they run through it, and won't be aggroed by the Symbol of Swiftness to slow you down as the Guardian. You'll notice when you run with Guardians that sometimes they'll just put the symbol right out in the middle and it can get people into aggro. Other times you'll see that they put the symbol right off to the side in the perfect placement where everyone can run through and avoid aggro. It's really, in my opinion, one of those very little things that goes such a long way to determining whether or not a player really knows what he's doing, and it's being judicious about that. It is the type of thing also that people might not even notice, and they might take it for granted, but it is an incredibly valuable asset to have a Guardian who knows what he's doing when it comes to Symbol of Swiftness, when to use it, and when it benefits his team the most. So the next thing I want to mention is blinds. In most metagroups, you have a Guardian and a Thief, so it's not as important for the Guardian to be able to blind. However, not everyone runs in perfect metacomps with a Thief every time, and in that case, the Guardian has to pick up the slack when it comes to the trash mobs. Guardians have the trait that will allow you to blind the enemies around you when you activate your Virtue of Justice. They also have a trait that allows Virtue of Justice to recharge when you kill an enemy. This means when you're fighting packs of trash mobs, Virtue of Justice should give you pretty significant blind uptime, definitely enough to mitigate a lot of the damage that the trash mobs do. This will allow you to successfully deal with packs of even difficult trash mobs without relying on a Thief to cast Black Powder, especially if you don't even have a Thief in your party. Against particular mobs with long wind-up, very hard-hitting attacks like Risen Abominations, the on-demand blinds are basically just as good as having another Aegis. I think it's the sign of a great Guardian who knows exactly when to pop his blinds to prevent attacks just like that. And it's one of those things that goes a long way towards giving your group tons of survivability, especially when people first seem to make the transition to a Guardian DPS build. They are not used to the small health pool, even with heavy armor, and they die quite a bit. And you find, in a lot of cases, they're dying because their Aegis management isn't good and their blind management isn't good. And when you're as squishy as a Berserker Guardian, being able to manage your blinds is going to give you tons of survivability. And it's a key skill in speedruns for Guardians to acquire. Now, we also know that a good Guardian is going to use Greatsword as his main weapon. Most people are aware that that is the bread and butter of the Guardian. It has multiple high damage attacks. Symbols inflict vulnerability. Leap of Faith is a gap closer, high damage attack. Whirling Wrath is one of the highest DPS attacks in the game. Binding Blade's an amazing pull that will group the enemies up so your team can cleave them down. It's just an all-around great weapon set for DPS. Most people are also aware that focus on your offhand swap set is really pretty much the best thing you can be doing with that slot. It's far superior in shield. The Symbol of Wrath is a great block and also a high DPS attack, as well as another on-demand blind with number 4, Ray of Judgment. So the other thing most people don't think about is they always typically default to the sword focus. However, there's definitely times when other main hands are better off than the sword, and it's a sign of an advanced Guardian who knows when to switch the different things. So I'll talk about the different 3 main hands and why you would use them and the distinction that they make. So swords come with a projectile reflect, a blind, and a high damage single target. Well, not single, it does cleave, but the cleave is rather small, especially in the 3rd attack. So for all intents and purposes, it's a really good single target attack. So in a type of situation, especially when you're fighting against trash mobs for the blind, trash mobs with projectiles that make Zealot's defense really good, or bosses that have attacks that are slow enough for your Aegis chains to deal with, and you don't need any more defense, Sword of Wrath and the sword auto attack chain is just really good. that's why it's the default. It's the high DPS option, and it also excels against small hitbox bosses who the Scepter might not be so ideal against. However, against large hitbox bosses, thanks to Smite, Scepter is the highest DPS weapon in the game. So long as all the attacks from the Smite hit, and you're fighting a very large hitbox boss, sort of like the Dredge Car in Sorrow's Embrace Path 3, or Giganticus Lupicus, or the tree bosses in Twilight Arbor, where all the attacks are going to hit, Smite is a tremendously high damage skill, and in combination with the auto attack, it's just really the best thing you can be doing against those bosses. And it's really up to a Guardian to know which bosses it's beneficial to be running Scepter against and which one is beneficial to be running Sword against. And it's the type of thing you really can't rely on the rest of your party to tell you. No one's going to tell you. You just have to know for yourself. And that is... I always notice it when I see a Guardian swap to Scepter at the right time. You go, now there's someone who's paying attention. There's someone who knows the bosses that he's fighting against intimately, and he's thinking outside the box on how he can maximize his damage. He's not just going in there with the sword and thinking it's a one-size-fits-all solution. So, lastly, the mace is also a quite important weapon in a lot of cases. The mace comes with Protector Strike, importantly, which is an on-demand block. That is key, because when you have mace focus, now you have 2 on-demand blocks. 2 on-demand blocks plus your Aegis Chain plus your Shelter means you're a block machine. When you're fighting a particular boss, say Mossman or Archdiviner, or the Etten and Fractals, anything that is very good at focusing a single target for aggro purposes. If the Guardian can take and hold aggro, they have enough blocks and Aegises to survive almost indefinitely while holding aggro and just blocking every attack that comes their way. And a large part of that is the low cooldown on Protector Strike. All these other skills are relatively high cooldown. Protector Strike is relatively low, and it's very valuable to have the mace out for that. If you are the type of Guardian who is very good at holding aggro on those Fractal bosses, you should definitely be using mace. It benefits from right-hand strength. The DPS isn't actually that bad, especially when you're using Symbol of Faith on cooldown. It compares quite favorably even to the Hammer, or the Greatsword, or the Sword. It's not really a low DPS option at all. But you really, to make the most of it, you want to be using the block. If you don't need the block, you should probably be using Sword for slightly higher DPS. But if you do need the block, and you'll benefit from it, switching to mace is definitely important. It's, like I said with other cases, it's a Guardian who's paying attention and intimately knows the encounters. You'll notice a Guardian switching to mace for a particular boss fight, and again you say, now there's a guy that knows the encounter very well and knows and is using all the resources at his disposal to make sure that he gets through the encounter doing it the best way possible. So the last thing I want to mention is that a good Guardian really comes down to not being lazy. A lot of times with this game, especially in some of the easier dungeons, it's very easy for players to just get lazy and go sort of on autopilot through the dungeon without really thinking, without putting in a ton of effort. And it just goes with the territory when we're all very used to the speedrun content at this point, and we have done it a lot of times. It's hard to summon the effort. However, more so than any other class, Guardians have a lot to do. They have a lot to manage. They're in charge of managing the reflex. They're in charge of managing the conditions. They need to manage the blocks for the team. There's quite a bit to do. And they have to focus on their good DPS rotations and their own weapon sets. So Guardians have quite a bit that they're in charge of. And it's super important that the Guardian player, more than anyone else, doesn't get lazy. The Guardian players, is there because he's unselfish and he wants to, and he's not necessarily carrying the players because they might be very good players in their own right, but he has the ability to carry the players if they need it. And that is the benefit of the Guardian. A Guardian player, the most important trait they can have is not to be lazy. So that's it for Guardians, guys. I hope this guide helped give you an idea of what's expected of Guardians and speedruns. If you guys have any questions or want to share any tips of your own, please feel free to leave a comment and participate in the discussion. Thanks, guys.